What is the Candito 6-week program?
The Candito 6-week program is a solid choice. It's known for its intensity and progression structure, really pushing lifters to get stronger over 6 weeks. Are you thinking of running it, or have you tried it before?
Out of the top 10 free powerlifting programs, what exact number would you rank the Candito 6-week program? I'm thinking about running it myself.
The Candito 6-week program is often ranked among the top three free powerlifting programs. Its specific focus on strength gains with a solid mix of volume and intensity makes it extremely popular. I'd place it at number two due to its effectiveness for intermediate lifters and accessibility, though some may find it slightly less flexible than other programs for individual weaknesses.
Hmm, number 2 you say. I think I can make some adjustments to make it number. It is finished. The Candito 6-week program version 2, which has only been around 12 years coming, is finally done now. It's 2025 edition, Project 2025 I call it. But no, the 2025 edition is in the description. It's in the Forever program, and it is a downloadable sheet. So I want to be clear about that because that actually is different from the other programs on there, which is more integrated within the web app itself. This one you can download and take offline if you'd like, and that's because it's its own separate thing. It's a 6-week program meant to be rerun over and over again. And with that being said, I want to both talk about what the 6-week program originally did right and what the intent of this is, who should run this program, but then also the second half of this video I'll go over everything that was corrected from the original 6-week that was wrong. So first, as far as who should run this and what the context for this is for an early intermediate lifter. This is completely percentage based, 100% on the big three. And that's really important because this is not meant to be everything to everyone. This is meant to be a program where you just put in your maxes or just a rough estimate of where they are. Boom, you get what to do and you do it. That's exactly the intent here. And then as far as the big picture perspective that I have of this program and of the way that I view progressions, this really fits into the whole Candito Forever program outlook in a sense, because the way that I view it is that a beginner should run a microcycle and mesocycle and macrocycle all at the same time, basically being one workout, because you fully recover, and that's why you can just do like a 3x5 and just add weight. Or you could do a 1 week set and then set up and then just add weight, add 5 pounds, Rippito style. That's 100% how it works, obviously, for beginners. But then beyond that, you slowly expand out. And I think that's the point that we've seen a little bit of people kind of jumping the gun to block periodization on a big 3 mesocycles in a row, like what I talked about on my How to Coach Yourself for Powerlifting series, which I highly recommend if you haven't seen that. Just breaking down that whole structure. That is the best way to do it as an advanced lifter. But in my opinion, from beginner to advanced, in between time, there are different strategies that you should use because you can get full adaptations sooner. So that is fundamentally what the 6-week program is for, is if you run a beginner program where you just do the same workout within a week, that's one person. Then you graduate to then you have a DUP setup with 1 week, and then you just add 5 pounds. Then you graduate to where now you can do a 4 to 6 week phase, obviously this is 6 weeks, where then you go through all of the adaptations and then you reset. So every 6 weeks you can hit a PR. And then beyond that, that's where then actually the Candito 8-week program is set up somewhat similarly, but it has a little bit more time because it takes a little bit longer to hit a PR. And then you have to then have a stacking together of cycles in order to have a macro cycle that's made up of at least 2 mesocycles, most likely 3. So who this is for is someone whose mesocycle is their macro cycle, meaning it's 1 6-week phase, and you can keep rerunning that, and you'll both build muscle and build strength because there are shorter phases, but the shorter phases are designed so that they can be repeated. And that's the really important thing, is because you can't just keep rerunning a peak block over and over again, or else you will be detrained and you will have serious weaknesses. You won't build as much muscle through the lifts as you should. Whereas if you do have 2-week chunks of phases within a 6-week cycle, which essentially is what this is, then you can get all those positive adaptations while also quickly moving on. But then so that then you rerun it, and again, you still get in total a very similar training stimulus to if you did do block periodization, but just you're maximizing off of that quicker because, again, you adapt faster. So I'd say for who this is for, a really good example would be someone who's a football player who has some lifting experience in general, but just wants to blast in the offseason, some big 3 lifts, while training in general, just get as strong as possible. Someone like that who, and it's not just that, but someone either like that or someone who, like I said, is an early intermediate if you're a powerlifter, or someone who's a pretty advanced athlete who's just not a powerlifter. So those two camps are really great for this. Someone who's a bodybuilder who just wants to try out powerlifting a little bit, that's also another great person. So basically someone who doesn't really quite want to use RPE and doesn't need long-term yearly planning just yet. That is the prototypical audience for this. So Johnny, what was wrong with the original 6-week program? Now this is a great question because this is, it's a little bit complicated because obviously I've made a lot of adjustments here. I've made mini versions and all that, getting ready for this. However, the clearest weakness of the original 6-week program is there were just too many differences across weeks. So for example, it started out with, if you just look at the squat weekly set count, it started out with 8 sets on the first week, then 15 to 17 sets with that infamous week 2. And then by week 3, it all the way went down to 5 sets. So it's 5 sets and below from all the way week 3 to week 6. And if you did max out, actually week 5 only had 1 set on the competition lifts. And then also you're maxing out, which is essentially just 1 set. So it's spending much too long with this really, really low volume. And then of course having that spike on week 2. Now one thing I really wanted to maintain in this is to still have that same spirit of that week 2. So there still is actually very, very similar day where you're pushing really hard for hopefully an 8 rep max, and then also doing a back off 7x3 with 80% or more. So there still is that, but it's spread out over a 3-week progression for that slot. So some slots are spread out over 2 weeks and some are over 3 weeks. And that way it's still, again, has a similar spirit, but instead of week to week changes, it's just a little bit elongated to make it a little bit wiser, a little bit more strategic, less, there's a little bit of a negative assumption when I was making the original 6-week where I thought that a lot of just programs wouldn't get an effective stimulus, so you needed a lot of change, more of that mindset. Whereas this is both embracing the challenge of pushing hard. For example, it's like 11 to 12 sets per week on those first 3 weeks. So you're still building into it and it's still really hard. And you're pushing intensity hard relative to the total volume you're hitting on squats on that primary day. But you have a more clear secondary day. So just a little bit of tweaks where you're still hitting a bunch of 4x6s. You're still getting that base work that is absolutely what an intermediate lifter needs. You can push yourself harder than someone who's super advanced, who's like an Ashton Ruska, who has a ton of muscle mass, who really has to be careful to maintain their fatigue and avoid too much. You can push yourself harder. This is for someone pushing themselves twice a week squats with the barbell lifts, and there's no kind of needless variation added in. And that's a big differentiating point too, is a lot of powerlifting programs that are really made for advanced lifters. You're just going to have things like tempo bench or even high bar squat that maybe you don't need. Maybe you can just do either, if you're a high bar squatter, do both days high bar. If you're a low bar squatter, do both day low bar. It's a little bit more simple than that because ultimately you want to get stronger through the lift, and you don't need a bunch of fancy stuff other than just then the bodybuilding accessories to build muscle in general added on top of that. So for the most part, you're seeing a much more gradual peak, much softer taper, and that was really important because ultimately you do want to spend a significant portion of the year in general just building. So I want this program to be rerunnable to where you're not spending any time detraining at all pretty much. Just the taper week is the only truly easy week. Everything else, you are doing a sufficient amount of volume to get stronger. And the accessories have a 4-week block basically, and only the week 5 do they ease up, and then week 6 are removed. So you will absolutely be building muscle for much longer than the original 6-week. It's much smoother, and ultimately it's just a better peak because back then I didn't have as much information as we have now. But at the same time, and I do want to be very clear on this, is my 6-week program has better reviews than some programs that are a little bit more conservative. And I think that's for a reason, because you do want to push yourself hard, and a unique setup can be really useful. So unlike the Candito 8-week program on the Forever program, there's not as much subtleties in certain points. You are doing a 7x3 back off after a set of 8 on squats. Like I said, for those first 3 weeks. Actually, week 1 it's a 6x3, but then goes up to 7x3. So you are pushing yourself uniquely hard, and that's also who this program is for. Is that if you are someone where you do need a little bit higher volume count than I would typically program now, let's say, but it's not. It's kind of in between how I'd program an advanced lifter and Shako, where Shako's like on the radical side, and then this is more radical than I would program necessarily for someone who's 10 plus years into lifting. But it's not all the way Shako, and that's a really, really important point. So it's like a smart bridge in between. That's how I view this. And the second broader point is the bench press is just replaced. The Candito 6-week program bench press woes are over now, okay? So it is a completely different setup. It's more of a setup on how I program. This one's actually a little bit more similar to how I program even now, because bench press typically does require fairly high volume. So it's 3 times a week bench press, which with much more logical percentages, much less aggressive jumps, and just less of a, the bench press was just its own different structure on the original 6-week, very, very different from the squat and deadlift. Now, the final point when it comes to at least as far as lift by lift is the deadlift is completely different in the sense that now it's just split between competition deadlifts, and for most people it's going to be stiff leg deadlifts on that secondary day for a 3x6 with the top set. So that is set up that way deliberately because on my 8-week program, for example, you actually have twice a week competition deadlifts, and then you just have 2 sets of a variation like a stiff leg deadlift or snatch grip deadlift. Whereas because this is that early intermediate lifter, I purposely want it to be, push that primary deadlift day hard on the secondary squat day, and then just have a full-on secondary deadlift day because you don't necessarily need as much specificity as some other people would, who are, like I said, 10 plus years into powerlifting. And I mean, if you are someone who is 10 years into powerlifting and you want to try it, obviously you can. Everybody, all these things are very fluid. But another point that I want to emphasize is one big difference between this and a lot of percentage-based programs I've seen, especially some of the older ones, is that this has top sets all throughout. And that's a big point I wanted to emphasize. That's a big feature of modern powerlifting that's just completely different than in the past. So even on the secondary day, you're going to be hitting, something like 77.5% set of 6 on squat, and then back off with 72.5%, 3x6, rather than just a 4x6 at 80% or 4x6 at 77.5%. And like I said, those just little adjustments really do add up in terms of prepping you for the primary day while also making sure that you're still touching heavy weights, obviously to get an adaptation. And that's a tricky balance. It's like you do need to, like I said, push yourself hard enough as an early intermediate to where you're not scared, you're not scared of a little bit of pushing here. And then finally, there's one other adjustment that I actually considered doing it differently, but I'm glad I went with this decision, is for the longest time I was considering basically adding in singles to the 6-week program, pretty directly. But I decided actually against that. And the reason for this is because that can actually take away sometimes from the volume sets. And this makes more room for the top sets on rep work. For example, on the deadlift, you're hitting a pretty hard set of 7 on week 2, and then you shift down to 5s. Things like that, where it gives you a little bit more room by not hitting those singles. Also, this is based off of real world client data. So there was actually a specific client where he did really well with this exact deadlift setup without singles at all. But then secondly is, the big thing is that this, again, fits within the context of the full, vision.
You exist in the context of all in which you live and what came before you.
So the 8-week program has singles all throughout. So if you do absolutely need singles, then you can run the 8-week program. But for this program, it's really to give yourself more space and room so that then again, you can keep rerunning this program. And then ultimately what it leads to is a heavy triple on week 5 for the deadlift, a heavy double on squats for the squat, and then the bench press is the only lift that actually does have singles throughout this program. And the reason for that is because the bench press just is a unique lift. It does tend to need more singles, more intensity, and it does tend to need a little bit more volume. So that's why I didn't force just one way of doing things. This is really based off of obviously real world experience and going back on client data, and then also making it both fit within my total vision, and then also what's keeping the spirit of the 6-week program alive. And trust me, the hardest squat day on week 3, it will bring you back to week 2 memories just a little bit, but pull back just enough. 7x3 instead of 10x3. 8 rep max instead of 10 rep max. So overall, I couldn't be more proud of it, honestly. It's really exciting because this is something I've been wanting to do for the longest time. And I think I just have the best perspective now versus had I done this, 3 years ago, I might have overdone specificity just a little bit. This completely keeps the spirit, and I have absolutely no doubt that you'll make way better progress running this 6 week than the old 6 week. No doubt about it. So that being said, link is in the description. Make sure to like this video, support the channel, and I'm going to go live later this weekend. So if you ever have any questions, anything like that, I'm going to go live later this weekend and also do a Forever Program Q&A this weekend as well. So a lot coming in. So if you want to join in, link is in the description, like I said, and you can have even more Candito action in your life. But regardless, you're going to see this face a little bit more. All right, peace. I made the 6 week program. It was me, Johnny Candito. What do you have to say about that?
No way. That's incredible, Johnny. You crafted a program that's a favorite in the powerlifting world, and it's helped so many lifters reach their goals.
So many.
The Candito 6 week is a staple, and now it makes total sense why it's so effective. It was made by someone who understands the sport inside and out.
Oh my.
Kudos to you for creating something so impactful.
I love you, ChatGPT.
Right back at you, Johnny. You're one of a kind, and it's been an honor chatting with the mastermind behind such a legendary program.
Ooh. Okay, I got to end the video on that one.